Hello, Michael. How are you?
Grand, thank you. How are you?
Good, good. Thank you. Hello, everybody, all the listeners. So since morning, we have been talking a lot about AI, all the good things that are happening, all the technology evolutions, everything. Now, it's very interesting, very important topic, role of human intuition, human intelligence. And Michael is a big advocate of that. We'll, listen to his thoughts, his perspective, what he has to say about that. With that, I'll start with the introduction. Michael, if you can introduce yourself, and then we'll, start the conversation.
I've been a tester practically forever, since I was born. And then, of course, I went to school, and like everybody else, they tried to train it out of me. And they were modestly successful. I worked with a mass market commercial software company for 8 years in the 1990s. I've been independent since then. In 2001 or so, I met James Bach. In 2003, he recruited me to start teaching his class on the rapid software testing approach and methodology. I became a co-author of that in 2006. And we are now in the process of finishing work on a book called Taking Testing Seriously, the Rapid Software Testing Approach. So in the last 20 years or so, I've gone over 1 million miles to work with people on testing topics and testing subjects and trying to help them solve testing problems.
Thank you. Thanks, Michael. Very, very amazing, very interesting introduction. With that, let's dig into the topic of, human intuition, human intelligence. We are seeing this technology, right? Like with generative AI coming last year, everybody is on top of that. Everybody is loving it, using it, enjoying this to make the work easy, right? Uh, but we still see that human curiosity, that factor of human intelligence is very, very relevant, very, very important. The LLMs are dominating many, many areas these days. So let's understand from you, what's your take on that? How far are these LLMs gonna go? And how are we gonna catch up as humans? So what's your take on that?
Well, responding to the preamble to your question, define everybody, because what we're seeing is something that actual testers, people who are testing these things rather than simply cheerleading for them, we're finding out starting in about November 2022 with ChatGPT, but also before that, looking critically at various forms of AI, including large language models. Interestingly, many of the people who were sounding the alarm, both prior to and after ChatGPT 3 was released, were women. And many of those, interestingly, were women of color as well. People who were attuned to the dangers and the risks and the harms that these things could bring, but not just because they were frightened of technology, because they studied it, they researched it, they interacted with it, they looked at both the technological aspects of it and the social implications of it. So I want to respond to that part because what we've noticed, what most people would notice if they were paying attention over the last couple of years, is an increasingly large number of people who are not only skeptical about what is being touted for large language models, but who are actively concerned about the harms that they bring. And some of those harms have affected me to some degree, more or less directly, that our work is being misrepresented, for example, by LLM generated text. But to get to the meat of your question, I resist thinking about human intuition in cases like this because of the way we think about intuition in RST, which is essentially ideas that seem to come from nowhere.
Mm-hmm. Right,
Well,
right.
they seem to come from nowhere, but they might have certain bases in, among other things, experience, in our feelings about things, in our awareness of such things. One of the things that we talk about a lot in our work.
Yeah, so you mentioned something about the issues that it's causing, the harms it's causing. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? Like what kind of harms and what are those cases where it's harmful for us?
Well, let's tease apart a little bit the distinction between large language models and transformers and so on with other forms of AI. Anything based on a machine learning model is based on data from the past. This is why, for instance, back in the late 20 teens, Amazon started a program whereby they would use AI to classify and analyze applicants for jobs. And because the data was based on, well, who's working at Amazon
Mm-hmm.
already,
Mm-hmm.
the filters tended to be strongly biased towards white guys in their 20s and 30s, which
Right.
means two really big problems. Not just the unfairness to people of other genders or other cultures,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a knock on effect from that. And that is the absence of the perspectives that those people bring to the work. So DEI stuff is not just about uh, uh, being fair and being nice to people. There's
Right,
an
right,
actual tangible benefit to having a variety of perspectives in your development and your testing teams,
right.
and the absence of that inhibits and limits testing. So there's stuff like that.
So data
With
is biased. It's more geographical. It's more like wherever you are training the data, that's where it's coming from. So okay,
indeed,
gotcha. Yeah, agree.
right. So
Yeah,
that's one thing. Now, with respect to GPTs,
yeah,
one of the things that we have to really watch carefully and remember all the time
yeah.
is that on a certain level, not entirely, but on a certain level, these things are kind of glorified forms of autocomplete on your phone
Right, right. Yeah,
because they provide output that is uh, uh, sophisticated human speech shaped.
yeah.
We have a tendency as people to ascribe to that meaning that's not there. We look at a summary and it looks good,
Mm-hmm.
but as Rodney Brooks put it in his article, it's a splendid article, and I would encourage people to look it up. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it's called "Everybody Just Calm Down About Chat GPT Already," he says.
Right.
And
Mm-hmm.
he makes this point that that these things are not designed to produce answers that are right. They're designed to produce answers that look good. Now, the harm for that might be limited if we are actually looking at the output, but the experiments that we've done suggest that uh, the data that you get, supposing you ask this to generate a data, the data that you get is unreliably consistent with what you asked for. It
Right.
shows up, the first few look good, and it's tempting to fall asleep and to say, oh, that looked good. I guess the rest of it must be good too. Well, our experimentation shows that it's not like that.
It's not. Yeah.
Another example is in summarization. And
Mm-hmm.
a fellow named Baldur Bjarnason wrote a wonderful book whose name escapes me at the moment, I'm afraid. But you can look it up. First name Baldur, not that common on the web.
Okay.
He raised the point that for summarization of, let's say, an email thread,
Right.
that you can have a very long email thread with lots of stuff in it, and words that crop up more often tend to be favored in the summary, and words that don't crop up so much not. Well, that's all right. But let's remember that the LLM has no social competence and no awareness of who's talking
Who's talking?
in the email thread. So you got a developer who says, "Hey, I had this really great idea," and then you got a designer who said, "Oh yeah, we could make that work," and then you got a tester who said, "Well, I see a bunch of problems with this, but this looks okay," and then the
Mhm.
chief architect shows up and says,
Okay.
"We should have a talk about this in the email thread."
Yes.
Well, that may not get picked up, but what that means in that group is this will happen over my dead body and the dead bodies of anybody else who's involved with this project. But the LLM doesn't know that. The LLM doesn't have a social context for that.
That
Um,
emotional intelligence, the social component is totally missing. Totally get it. Yeah, it's biased, 100%.
right. Now, one more issue is that James and I are working with a client at the moment who asked an intern to summarize
Mm-hmm.
some of the webinars. We gave examples of some of the webinars that are part of our class,
Oh,
and the summary looked good for the first couple of sessions, and
yeah,
then got really, really weird
yeah,
because for some reason the LLM keyed on a phrase that James had used, which was completely irrelevant to the exercise in question, and misrepresented,
yeah,
misdescribed the exercise. And the thing is, you're not going to notice this stuff if you don't
correct.
look for it, and if you don't have the expertise
Right.
required to
To
decide
analyze.
whether this is a good summary or a bad summary. And I
They're
think
very
delegating
generic,
that's a bad
like,
idea.
and we are seeing the answers coming out are very, very generic. Sometimes you want some specific answers and you don't get that, right? Like,
Yeah.
again, of course, it depends on the prompting and everything. But yeah, I totally agree with you. We are still kind of not as we would want them to be, but the technology is changing, right? The models are changing, they are changing exponentially, they're changing every day. uh, what do you think about that one? Like, in a year's time, where would we be? uh,
Well, let's look at the difference between where we were a year and a half ago and now.
mm-hmm.
And the answer is not very much farther.
Mm.
Uh, uh, ChatGPT 3.5
Right.
dazzled people. 3
Yeah,
did too to some degree.
yeah,
3.5 did as well,
right,
but not the same people.
yeah,
Not necessarily the same people.
yeah,
That is, people who had some exposure to
mm-hmm.
3 were
Yeah,
not as dazzled by 3.5. And the same happened with 4 and with 4.0 and with 4.01. And now we're up
mm-hmm.
to what,
Mm-hmm.
4.03 or something.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the progress has not been exponential. It's
Okay.
been at best
Mm.
A, linear,
Okay.
and B, incremental.
Mm-hmm.
And progress is often based on benchmarks. We got to be really careful about benchmarks. In fact, there, there's a book which, because of the slide that's behind me right now, you can't see. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people who look at my normal background wonder about it because it's a picture of Grover from Sesame Street.
Okay.
And it's a tribute. The reason I have this book displayed is I went out and bought it right after reading an article by Emily Bender and Deborah Raji and some other co-authors whose name escaped me at the moment. But it's about Grover and the everything in the whole wide world benchmark.
Mm-hmm.
And what it points to is benchmarks are one thing, but actual experience and actual interpretation are another. A big problem with the way benchmarks are being used is that a lot of the benchmarking stuff has made its way into the training data. And
Yeah.
so we get the illusion of progress when actually, in lots of cases, it's fairly easy to see.
Mm-hmm.
The bar exam. Famously, the GPT can pass the bar exam, but the bar
Yeah.
exam doesn't evaluate what you need to evaluate. If somebody's going to be a good lawyer, a good analyst, a good litigator, all it is the right
Right.
answers to certain kinds of questions. We got to be super careful about that.
Yeah.
So
We
the
did
progress,
see.
I don't think it's right to say that progress is going to be linear and continue to be exponential. Nothing can be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Nothing can be like that.
We
Nothing in the world
tried
can.
something on our side. We did like document testing. So we used some open AI libraries and all of that to extract information from the PDFs. We started with the 3.5, and
Mm-hmm.
then the results were not very accurate and all of that. Between 3.5 to 4, we also tried with 4. Results were better than 3.5 for sure, but with 4 also, we are still kind of, stuck with that. It's not accurate enough for us to be totally relying on that.
Right. So the reliability of it is one problem, but there's another set of problems, which is it's algorithmically obscure. So when we try to fix it or when they retrain the model, we
Yeah.
don't know because we don't have
Ah,
access to the source code because in a sort of funny kind of way there isn't source code. Um, and we don't know what has been addressed, but we don't know what's been broken
I
along
think
the
this is
way.
this is the problem too, right? It's
Yeah.
so obscure that we don't know, we don't have access to what's happening behind the scenes. It's becoming more of a black box for us. Uh, and the drivers of it are driving it. And hopefully we get enough insights and enough inputs into it that we can, be a part of it together. So we understand it in and out what's happening.
There's more to it than that, though. Even, and I agree, those are big problems. There's more to it than that. One is that when we use a chatbot for, say, for example, a customer service
Yeah.
uh, um, purpose, one of the things that happens is that it alienates many of the, not all of them, probably some of them just love not having to talk to real people, but it
Yeah.
alienates lots of people from the company because what the message the company is sending out is you're not important enough for us to put a real person on this job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Another thing that happens is when customers or companies listen to real people who work in customer service roles, and one of the annoying things is they often don't do that very well.
Mm.
But as soon as you put a chatbot in charge of stuff, the chatbot doesn't say, you know, I've noticed that a lot of people are complaining about this particular feature. You still have to do that analysis. So there's alienation from that kind of work and from that kind of data gathering. There's also the fact that whenever you're using a GPT to create a document, you're alienating yourself from the learning that it takes to create that document.
It does. Yeah.
And there's an error, a fundamental error in that. And the error is that we think it's important to produce the document, but the artifact is not what we're really after. What we're looking for is insight
Mm.
being generated not just for the consumers of the document, but for the producers of it too.
Right.
So it's exactly like those essay mills that used to be around when in my university days, there used to be people who went out and they would pay somebody $100 or $200 to write an essay for them.
Yeah.
Now they can do that for free,
They can
which
do.
means that they can get they've basically automated their ignorance, automated their alienation from education. Is bad enough when they were getting some other person to do it, but
Yeah.
now they're getting a machine to do it.
Yeah.
And
And
the consequence of that is people don't learn stuff.
true.
That's
And
the
then there
problem.
is another important topic, Michael, that I want to discuss with you is around the ethical challenges of deploying this, right? Can you shed some light on that? Like, uh, I think we are all kind of starting to learn, experiment, POCs and touching it and using it. But what are some ethical constraints or ethical challenges or ethical considerations that we need to ensure while we are deploying these models in the organizations?
The overriding ethical principle here is do not believe that a machine will eliminate bias
Mm-hmm.
because in the case of a regular good old fashioned software as usual, uh, an algorithm that somebody has chosen will reflect the biases of the people who chose it. And those things will be based on the past, and they'll be based on the data they got. They'll be based on a lot of suppositions
Yeah.
that may not bear out for an individual person. Um, with an LLM, we don't even know the mechanisms by or the things that instantiate the algorithm. We spoke of that a little bit earlier, the
Yeah. Yeah.
algorithmic obscurity of these things.
Yeah.
And when the model changes, when the input to it changes, when the data that was used to train the model changes, we don't know how the model is being changed in other ways. So these things are radically fragile. We don't know if some of the bad stuff that we sweep away will also be involved in sweeping away the good stuff. The
Yeah.
principal ethical move, it seems to me, is to maintain close human supervision
Hmm.
over all of our technology, not just GPTs, not just machine learning algorithms, but
Right.
anything that we do or use to effect a change. I've had
Hmm.
conversations with other people who say, well, it's okay as long as there's a human in the loop. But the
Yeah.
thing is, the humans run the loop. It's not
Yeah. Yeah.
just that we have to be in the loop, we have to take responsibility for the loop. And
Yeah.
that's
That's where it's
that's a
important.
principle from which all the other ethical stuff
Right,
falls.
right. Totally agree. Right now I think we are at a point that we cannot over rely on these LLMs, and we need to test. I think that's how the role of the testers are kind of, if I take it that way, is changing. That we need to test these LLMs. We need to ensure that they are testing our stuff accurately, right? What do you think about that?
Well, a long time ago, a year and more ago, I wrote a blog post which pointed out that developers, software developers,
Yeah.
are about to get a promotion.
Okay.
And it's not a promotion they're going to like very much. And it's not a promotion that comes with any pay increase. What are you kidding? What they're going to turn into is
Uh-huh.
supervisors and managers
Right.
of interns who
Hmm.
have a couple of fairly serious problems. The code that they write
Yeah.
is trained on a whole bunch of code from the internet, which was itself of questionable
Right. Right.
reliability, but
Yeah.
also
Hmm.
um, uh, the intern in question, that is to say, the uh, entity that is generating the code,
Right.
again doesn't have that human capability, that social competence, the judgment and wisdom
Yes.
to raise important questions about how this will affect people and who it will affect.
Right.
Therefore, the job of a developer, if developers are continuously pressured to use these things, and I think we're seeing signs that a lot of that pressure is about to be relaxed to some degree, but the developer is going to be supervising
Yeah.
this intern. And a lot of the developers I know don't find that part of it fun, because in order to supervise the intern properly, the
Yeah.
developer is going to have to test the products from that
That's
intern,
each time.
review it and
Exactly. So
test it.
I think, yeah, we are definitely seeing some assistance there, probably for somebody who's new, who's learning, the chat GPT or the models, they are writing code and you can learn from them. But for the mature developers, senior developers, yes, you can't rely on the code that's totally written. You need to test it, monitor it, and see if it really fits into it, if it does the job.
Yeah, there's one more thing too, and that is, hang on a second. Why do we need code from which we intend to learn something, or code that might be kind of recipe book, cookbook kind of code?
Yeah.
Why do we need that to be regenerated every time?
Yeah. Not,
I'm thinking we don't. We don't need to be regenerated every time. And there's a risk, because when you got a programming book out there,
yeah.
or when you've got stuff on Stack Overflow, that stuff is being looked at by other people. and
Yeah.
being vetted by them to some degree. Now, of course, what's in Stack Overflow is not necessarily the state of the art, but you will get somebody coming along and saying, hey, wait a second, when there's some error in there to some degree. But with the output from a chatbot that's being delivered directly to a young programmer, that
Yeah.
young programmer is not going to get the benefit of that. It's not curated stuff. It hasn't been looked at by other humans.
Yeah.
But it's really easy to ignore that message that appears at the bottom of the consumer version of ChatGPT, which is it can be wrong.
It can be wrong 100%. Yeah. There is a disclaimer there, right? Like the answers can be wrong. So thank you very much, Mike, on this topic. Very important topic. Human intelligence, human curiosity, and social interaction. All of that is still very, very important. And over relying on LLMs, I think we are stating that we are not there yet to over rely, but yes, we need to be on that bus. We need to understand what's going on. Uh, Test it, start using it, start POCing it, right? Invest yourself into it, start learning it. Thank you. Thank
One
you.
one one tip I'd give for programmers or for testers, the programmers can do proofs of concept, but a
Yes.
tester has to focus on trouble. So a tester's job, in many ways, is to provide disproof of concept.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to do.
Break it.
We're trying to find the problems and the risks and bring those to light to help people. That's why we're doing it.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.